Jim and I were actually approached by a laboratory in Santiago, Chile that had, at that point in time, more than 90 capuchin monkeys in their care. They were all individually housed in small cages, smaller than 1 meter by 1 meter, that were hanging on walls off the ground, monkeys living on the mesh floor side by side. They had been used for any number of experiments over the years, medical and pharmaceutical experiments. And, you know, some of them had been born at the lab, others had been there for more than 20 years, and the eldest individual at the lab was 30 years old. Jim and I, following our success in rehabilitating a group of solitary housed stump-tailed macaques in previous years from a British laboratory, we felt highly motivated to do something for these capuchin monkeys, and we thought that we could be successful because we had been so successful with our stump-tailed macaques, more than we had expected. So we agreed to, at that point in time, to rehome at least an initial group of 35, and with the provision that if that all went as to plan, that we would take on another batch of 35 after that first group settled. So 70 monkeys all in. It would be done over a period of 1 year or more in a couple of different shipments. Time dragged on. Getting the permits for all of the monkeys was a lengthy process. Getting all of the travel arrangements. All in, it took more than 1 year, 1.5 years or more, to organize and effect the rescue. And by that point, Jim had sadly passed away. So we hadn't actually gone to get the monkeys, and what I hadn't realized at that point in time is the lab was coming under intense protests, and the people working in the lab were actually getting death threats at that point in time. So the laboratory contacted me and said because of the political situation, they would have to ask us to come take as many of the monkeys away as we could, and the rest would simply be euthanized, and that would be that, because they couldn't allow their staff to continue to be threatened. We do not consider ourselves animal rights activists, not even a little bit. That's not at all what Monkey World's about. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to walk in and out of laboratories as I do. We get calls from laboratories to retire primates, as well as from the pet industry to retire primates, because people know all we care about is the animal's welfare. I'm not interested in the politics of how and why animals are being used so much. I simply want to ensure that they're being looked after properly, because let's face it, the animals aren't having an opinion on where, why, or how they're being used. They're just in whatever circumstance they are. So we go in with a very different hat on than any animal rights activists. A lot of the anti-vivisectionists want us to object outright to primates being in labs, and we refuse to enter that debate because it means that we will never be allowed to rescue another laboratory primate in our life. If we start having specific opinions about the laboratory industry in terms of its morals, whether, you know, primates should be kept in labs or not. Jeremy, my sort of animal director, and I, you know, put our heads together and thought about it and decided that, yeah, we could come up with 5 different enclosures that were large enough and complex enough to keep and accommodate the capuchins in a very nice way, and that probably out of all of those at that point 88 capuchin monkeys, that probably 5 groups would be about right for what we had expected. So in our heads we were good to go. We could try and move all 88 at once and see how we got on. But then of course you have the consideration that a lot of these guys are intensely institutionalized, and I didn't know how crazy they were. I knew that some of them had been self-harming while at the laboratory. Some of them were antisocial and highly aggressive. There were quite a few of them that were potentially going to be a danger to both themselves or to any others. And, you know, you can try and sit with piles of papers and files and pick out which individuals you'd like to sort of say, okay, this individual's young, he stands a good chance of rehabilitation. But then you're torn, because what about the 30-year-old boy who's been there all of his life? Maybe it would be a nice idea to give him a shot at the great outdoors before he does pass away. So, you know, we were emotionally sort of had our hands tied. But at the same time, I knew that it was unlikely that all 88 were going to be good candidates for rehabilitation. A certain number of them were likely to have to be euthanized. If that was indeed what was going to happen, we should be the ones who face up to that reality, rather than simply saying, oh, we're going to leave them behind and let somebody else take on that bitter bullet. Luckily, my primate care staff agreed entirely, so with that, I got back in touch with the lab and said, we'll have them all. The Chilean Air Force, who stepped in and offered to fly us and our 88 monkeys by Hercules from Santiago direct to Britain, and indeed the British government was also extremely helpful and concerned about the welfare of the primates, so they gave us special permission to land at Bournemouth Airport locally. So yeah, the monkeys, we made it all back with all 88 monkeys healthy and safe, and we landed at Bournemouth Airport, and that was a couple of months ago now, and everybody's healthy and happy and all living together, socialized, and all 88 are doing brilliantly. Really surprised by that. Like I said, I had thought that a certain number of them just would be too institutionalized to even take the journey here. But everybody's made it just brilliantly, and they're all living a really much improved life with others of their own kind in big natural areas. So we're really happy for them.